Welcome back. Bando's Breakdowns, episode 20. Very, very glad to be with you guys. We just shortly kicked off the month of September a couple of days ago. My name is Zain Bando. Again, thank you guys for joining me. A lot to get to in today's episode, including a ton of college football news and notes, the start of the NFL season, some combat sports talk, and so much more. Before we get into it, though, please be sure to go to youtube.com/ETV network. This is very important as we just eclipsed a little over 860 subscribers within the last couple of weeks. So if you could do everything you can to be sure to like this episode or the episode and hit the notification bell, as it really helps out the algorithm and it helps out me to know what content you guys want and what the show is going to look like in future episodes. So again, would be very much appreciated if you guys took the extra steps and did that. Another extra step that you guys can take too is if you were watching on the video only feed on YouTube, you can go over to our podcast feeds and listen to Bando's Breakdowns wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Premium, Acast, and so much more. The audio feed is available for you guys as well. And of course, if you are listening on the audio only version of this, please do the inverse and go back over to YouTube. It is very, very much appreciated. It's also wanted to give you guys a quick reminder too to please go to etvpodcast.com. This is also very important as we are beefing up our writing presence over there. So if you want to check out all the latest news and notes in the NFL ahead of the first week of the season, whether it's major contract extensions, trades, injuries, you name it, you can check out all of that over there, as well as some of our ever evolving combat content related to weekly UFC events, which should be able to restart here in the near future. We have 3 UFC events over the next 4 weeks in the month of September, and then we don't have another off week of UFC until Thanksgiving. So stay tuned for all of that and so much more over on the website side as well. And I would be remiss if I did not remind all of you that Bando's Breakdowns, as well as every other show on the network, is presented by Playback. And as you guys know, Playback has been a wonderful partner to us, has allowed us to do a lot of different live games and also live streams too of various things. We just had a fantasy football draft the other night. We did some stuff regarding the Olympics. We did some NBA postseason games. We did a lot of different things on the Playback side to grow that community over there. So if you go to playback.tv/ETB network, that would be much appreciated. So without further ado, here we go. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience, from playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together, and again, as a reminder, you can join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB network to find out more, including our live stream schedule, which will probably end up getting a whole lot busier with the NFL getting underway and some other sports on the pipeline as well. So stay tuned for more on that and so much more. That's all of our socials, including and which breakdowns at ETB Network and all of the other major socials that we have across the network for all of the shows. So be sure to stay tuned in. Be sure to have your post notifications on. That way you don't miss a single update of everything that's going on across the network with all of our shows. It would be very much appreciated. So getting into the show today, I have a lot of exciting stuff to discuss, starting with Zan's overview and the introduction, of course. Just to get into what we're going to be discussing today, we're going to be talking about a lot about college football. What kind of happened? A roundup of week one had a lot of exciting games, exciting finishes, upsets, some non-surprises as well. We're also going to talk about the conference that I have the most allegiance to. We're going to talk about how those teams did in the first week of the season. We're also going to preview some major games in week two, including some games on the Big Ten. There's also there's a marquee game at the top of the Big Ten, which we'll get into later in the show. And there's also some local games around the Big Ten that I'm excited about. And of course, we're going to talk about the first week in the NFL. We're going to preview Bears Titans. We're going to go over some of the other games to watch. We're also going to go over the upcoming UFC event that's this Saturday from the Apex. That's actually a rare fight night card that's actually good. So we have a lot of stuff to go over in such a short amount of time. So without further ado, we're going to get underway, and we're going to start with what I like to call college football madness, because that is what week one brought to the table. Had a lot of exciting finishes, as I just alluded to, and a lot of just fantastic storylines that I don't think a lot of people would have expected. And starting out with the biggest storyline, the storyline that everyone's going to be talking about at the time that we're recording this. It's Tuesday morning. This is going to air on Wednesday afternoon and 3 Eastern, noon Pacific. But in any event, one of the biggest upsets of the weekend, if not the biggest upset of the weekend, was Boston College going into Tallahassee and knocking off number 10 Florida State. At the time that they we're number 10 at the time that we're recording this. I'm almost pretty positive that the AP poll for this week has yet to be revealed. But speaking of that, though, what's interesting, actually we could just go off of a projected poll. This is according to the Action Network's Brett McMurphy. He has, just to give you a little brief insight here. So Georgia would remain number one in this scenario. Ohio State would remain number two. Oregon remains number three. Texas is at number four. Alabama is at number five. Penn State is at number six. Miami is at number seven. Notre Dame, with their win all over the weekend as well, is at number eight. And Brett McMurphy actually has Florida State out of his top 10 after starting 0-2, and rightfully so. I mean, this team was brutal. They let Castellanos for Boston College pretty much do whatever they wanted. Boston College forced several turnovers. DJ Ngule is, literally almost got booed off the field. I mean, people were calling for the backup quarterback to come into the game for much of the game. I mean, this game was just a downright dumpster fire. And if you thought that the Georgia Tech loss on the last second field goal in Ireland was any indication as to where this team is, and maybe the non-college football playoff / undefeated hangover has finally hit Florida State, I think the answer to that is that it's bound to be true. This team looked like a shell of its former self, could not get the offense in sync at all, and maybe this Boston College team is better than we thought. I mean, obviously, this is the first time in over a decade that they beat a top 10 ranked team. Much less in the opener. Bill O'Brien has tons of college football experience as well as experience at the NFL level. So for him to get a win like this, and for him to, essentially begin his tenure off and the off on the right foot, or begin his season off on the right foot rather, and to get a major upset nationally like this has got to be huge for Boston College's confidence. And when you look at the remainder of their schedule, and Louis Riddick was talking about it last night too, or excuse me, 2 nights ago, or from when this is gonna premiere. Louis Riddick was talking on ESPN, that there's not a single game on Boston College's remaining schedule that they will maybe be favored in, or B have a chance to win. I mean, if you look at who Boston College is playing moving forward, I mean, this is pretty interesting. I mean, they've got 2 non-conference games coming up in Duquesne at home this coming Saturday, and their toughest non-conference game, which is probably a game that they won't be favored in, is going to be against number 11 Missouri. That's not going to be easy. But then you get a Michigan State team that's still in rebuild mode. You get a Western Kentucky team that's probably okay. They're like a mid-tier 7-5 type of team. Virginia, who's always inconsistent. Virginia Tech, who might be good. Louisville, who has scored over 60 points, but that was against an opponent that, you're supposed to do that. They just beat Austin Peay over the weekend. That's a team that you're supposed to beat in that fashion. Then you're playing a Syracuse team in mid-November, who a lot of people have already written off. Some people don't think this Syracuse team is really going to be any good. And then they have a Southern Methodist team who is a new addition to the conference at Southern Methodist, which will be very interesting. And then, of course, they end the season with the 2 biggest games of the year. They end the year with the Drake Mayless North Carolina team. As we all know, Drake May is now with the Patriots, and they end with the Pittsburgh team at home, who's always tough. So just given their schedule, having to avoid, major schools like Clemson, having to avoid, Miami, who's supposed to be really good, and already getting through Florida State, who was a top 10 team going into this game. This is a this is a team that, just based on the schedule that they have, and it's much less about the talent that they have, it's about who they're playing going forward. To me, this screams a 7-win team, an 8-win team, or maybe even a 9-win team that sneaks into the ACC championship, to everybody's surprise. But I think that this win for Boston College shows that they're no pushover, and to go into Tallahassee and hold Florida State, one of the most high-powered offenses in the country, a year ago, a team that everybody thought was going to make the college football playoff until Jordan Travis's injury. I mean, you want to talk about an upset of all upsets. This has to be already, and we're going into week 2 of the college football season. This is to be up there as one of the biggest upsets of the entire year. And I think when we look back on it, assuming that my prediction with Boston College potentially being legit comes true, this could very well look like an upset by the end of the year that would go down as one of the top 3 upsets that took place in 2024. So to write off Boston College and to say that this was a fluky win, I think is a mistake. And for Florida State, it's simply about picking up the pieces now and figuring out where you went wrong. Mike Norvell really had no words after this game to describe, how his team played. He seemed very disappointed in their performance, rightfully so. I mean, this was a team that everyone thought would coast through the ACC and maybe get tripped up against Miami. Now you're in a situation where you're sitting at 0-2, you're going nowhere fast, and now everybody in the ACC is looking up at Florida State, going, "Oh wow, we actually may have a chance to beat this team," and this team might end up being the pushover. So this was a fascinating upset, a game that I greatly enjoyed watching. I watched the whole thing, and this Boston College team, I think will be fun to watch in the weeks ahead. Moving right along, though, we had a bunch of other interesting games that took place over the weekend, and one of them having been probably one of the most interesting college football games on the schedule, and that was USC taking on LSU in Las Vegas. This was a game that was hyped up for weeks and weeks now. Lincoln Riley versus Brian Kelly, two of the most polarizing coaches in all of college football. And of course, we really didn't know how this game was going to go, because these two teams, are brand new quarterbacks. You got Garrett Nussmeier for LSU, and you got Miller Moss for USC. And if you guys listened to Forever Power 5, the first episode, I correctly predicted that USC would cover the spread. They did in this game. They won the game late. They played super well. Zach Branch, who comes from the long line of the Branch family, obviously in direct relation to Cliff Branch. They're a longtime Raiders legend. He made some very nice catches. Miller Moss had pretty much a clean game. The running attack was great, and I think USC just frustrated LSU. I mean, LSU gave USC clearly too much time on the clock. They gave them over a minute to go in the game, and USC was able to win the game late with only a couple seconds left. And as someone who has not been the biggest fan of Brian Kelly, dating back to his days at Notre Dame, to see LSU lose their last 5 straight openers and to see Kelly be a part of a couple of them has been pretty sweet. And I think what's even cooler is, I saw a lot of experts, maybe that covered the Pac-12 but didn't necessarily cover the Big Ten. And people were like, "Oh, maybe this USC team, is biting off more than they can chew. They're one of the Big Ten's newer teams. This is a game that might trip them up. It's a Big Ten, SEC matchup." And USC was unfazed. It seemed that they didn't care that they were in a brand new conference. They didn't really care about any of that. They just went in and did their thing, and I thought that's what made the game as exciting as it was. These were two high flying offenses that scored a boatload of points. Both teams kept the game very competitive. It was a close game. This is a game in Vegas where, if you were there or if you watched it on TV, no matter if you had a dog in this fight, be excited. Like, hey, this is the level of college football that we're seeing in a mecca, city like Las Vegas. I mean, this could not have gone any better, even if you weren't physically at this game. And I think from a USC perspective, I personally think, and even though this is just one game, and even though you know you can't really judge an entire team after a single game, when you look at when you look at Miller Moss, the way that he's carried himself, and you look at how much time he's had to wait for his opportunity, playing, in the shadows of Caleb Williams essentially, and really only having one true start where he looked good. He looked good in the Holiday Bowl back in December, before New Year's, where USC was able to win their bowl game. But I think when you look at Miller Moss, though, I mean, he's just someone that I think has waited his turn, and he knows what an opportunity this is. It's not like he was thrust into USC system and was like, here, go learn Caleb Williams' playbook. It's been years and years of preparation for this kid. And I think you have to give him all the credit in the world, just considering that, he has so much pressure on him. They're in a new conference. No one really knows how USC is going to do. They got to compete with the likes of Michigan and Ohio State and Oregon, and obviously their current, Pac-12 rivals too, in Washington as well, and obviously other schools along the way. But to get a win like this against a nationally recognized SEC program, and an SEC program that a lot of people thought, oh no, Nick Saban's no longer at Alabama, this could be LSU's year to win the SEC. I think now, looking at it from after a first game perspective, they are far from where they need to be. And if I was an LSU fan, I would be furious at Brian Kelly for not fully taking responsibility, because for him to say to reporters that we're sitting here again for however many years it's been in a row, we're talking about the same damn thing. It's let me just give you a reminder. It's you who caused it. And obviously, I'm going to get more into it when I get into Zain Zinger about how I really feel about Brian Kelly. But him not taking full responsibility for his team not being where they need to be, and for him, saying that his underclassmen, have battle scars from some of these losses. Like, I just don't understand the limbo or the language or any of that. I think he's making himself look bad in this regard, and I also think that, and I'm going to get more into this in a little bit, but I just think he needs to sit back and understand where he could have played a part in this, because part of this loss, I think, is I think it's on him to a certain extent. Speaking of Brian Kelly, his old team Notre Dame went into College Station over the weekend and knocked off a much improved Texas A&M team, and this was a bit of an uglier game, a bit of a low scoring game until late in the game, but Notre Dame was able to get a huge road win. And this is something where my colleague Nick DiMartino talked about it. Post Halloween is when Notre Dame, struggles on the road, and they had an early road test in a very hostile environment, and they were able to win the game. And I just think it's interesting to note too that Notre Dame in previous years, they'll play in some of these games where you'll think they'll win, and they just underperformed. And a lot of people were on the side of A&M. I was on the side of Notre Dame due to the experience factor. I mean, you got Riley Leonard coming in from Duke. He's a kid that has had a lot of collegiate experience. Was overcome by injuries a little bit. That's why he had a shorter season a year ago. And to also go in there against your old coach and beat your old coach, Mike Elko, well, that had to feel great too. So if you're a Notre Dame fan, this is a program that's definitely on the rise. They have a bit of an easier schedule. They have their home opener against Northern Illinois this coming Saturday, and their toughest game, quote unquote, I guess, leading up to the end of the year would probably have to be Florida State, assuming Florida State gets their stuff together. But if not, I've seen people say that this Notre Dame team, with the schedule that they have, could go anywhere from 10-2 to 12-0. So you mean to tell me that that Notre Dame is potentially done for, and this was a fluky win? I think this was the furthest thing from a fluky win. College Station is a very difficult place to win at, especially Kyle Field, which has been known for some of the best A&M games over the last decade. You got to go back to the years when Johnny Manziel and Mike Evans were on the same team. But to go into an environment like that and win before the home schedule gets underway is huge for Notre Dame. And as I said, I'm not a fan of the Here Come the Irish documentary, but I think anybody who was not interested in the Here Come the Irish documentary before this game are potentially now interested in the documentary afterward, because this is going to be a story to follow. Because if they don't go undefeated and if they don't at least win one college football playoff game, assuming that they make the college football playoff, then this Notre Dame 2024 season was probably a colossal failure. But maybe it's just me overreacting. Switching over to the SEC, just wanted to briefly touch on a few things here. Georgia knocking off Clemson, as well as Alabama winning their opener in Kalen DeBoer's first game as head coach. This was no surprise to me. Georgia absolutely dominated Clemson. The final there was 34-3. Didn't let Cade Klubnik really do anything. Carson Beck had a whale of a game there as well. And this is a Georgia team that looks like they're back on the horse, and more than likely they'll be number one all year. I mean, this offense is tough to stop. Obviously the defense did not let Clemson score whatsoever, and this was a game that looked over even as early as halftime. I mean Georgia just looked tremendous. And what I think is even more interesting too is Georgia realizes that these are warm up games, because if you look at Georgia's schedule and who they play, I mean, I think it's just interesting to note some of these things. So they have two games coming up before arguably the game of the year. So they've got Tennessee Tech coming up, which they're probably favored by 40 plus, and then they've got a Kentucky team who just won their first game 31-0. Then you have an Alabama team in Tuscaloosa, and as I just alluded to, that's going to be the game of the year. I think every person in America is going to watch that. And even someone like me who's solely a Big Ten supporter, there's no way I can't miss that. And they've got Auburn at home. Then they got Mississippi State. Then they have arguably another potential game of the year in number 4 Texas. This is not this is not an easy schedule to start. So to get these warm up games, especially and I'm not discounting Clemson. Clemson was the 14th ranked team in the country going in, but when you only score 3 points and you're Dabo Sweeney, this coach that's been around forever, that has this innovative offense and whatnot, and has this philosophy around how to coach football the right way, and you go in and you only score 3 points against an SEC juggernaut, or has been an SEC juggernaut for years now. That's a major concern. And I think that that's something that most people are missing, is that this Clemson team should have hung with Georgia and they simply couldn't do it. And that, I think, is a major problem, just considering that was supposed to be one of the marquee games of the day. But when you look at where Alabama currently sits, and there's no way I wasn't gonna mention them. They beat Western Kentucky 63-0. Okay, so to do that in your home opener in Kalen DeBoer's first game, when there's all this pressure on him, is is pretty remarkable. And it's not like they shouldn't have beat Western Kentucky, because they obviously should. They did what they needed to do, but to do it in that fashion, to score 63 points and not even let Western Kentucky get within even striking distance of scoring a touchdown is unbelievable. When you look ahead at Alabama's schedule, they got a South Florida team that's probably okay. They got a Wisconsin team at Wisconsin that just snuck by Western Michigan, and then they play Georgia, they play Vanderbilt, they play South Carolina at home, and then they play Tennessee. So if Alabama can get through South Florida and Wisconsin, and both of these teams are undefeated, it could definitely serve as a potential turning point in the SEC moving forward. And I think that's something to watch. Moving right along, though, to the conference that I follow the most, the Big Ten. The Big Ten did really, really well this past weekend, finishing 17-1 overall. The only loss was a Minnesota missed field goal against North Carolina, which was just a devastating ending to, what would have been a signature win for PJ Fleck on national TV. They couldn't get it done. But some other notable games to look at, though, as some teams who played well, and I was at this one. Illinois dominated Eastern Illinois 45-0 in their season opener. Northwestern beat Miami of Ohio 13-6 in a defensive slugfest. You had Michigan knocking off Fresno State. You had UCLA knocking off Hawaii in a really close game. That's a game that Hawaii actually covered the spread. So for those of you who won money on Hawaii, congratulations on that. And of course, um, not to mention the fact that Ohio State dominated Akron, Michigan beat Fresno State, Oregon had a slight scare against Idaho, but was able to hold on and win by I think it was around the 10 point mark or so. Then obviously, as I just alluded to, you had USC knocking off LSU, you had Iowa beating Illinois State, Purdue beating Indiana State, so on and so forth. The Big Ten did really well. I don't know if they can keep this up every single week because now eventually Big Ten teams will be playing against one another. So this record obviously won't last long, but to go 17 for 18 in week one, I think is something that a lot of people were arguably not expecting. So for those of you who had the 17 leg parlay and won a bunch of cash off it, congratulations, because that's not easy for one conference to win 17 out of 18 games. So that was very, very impressive. Shifting over and shifting gears a little bit from college football to combat sports, we got UFC Vegas 97 taking place from the Apex in Las Vegas. This is the first UFC event in 2 weeks, as the UFC had a dark period to end the month of August, a rare off weekend for the promotion. And we have a huge welterweight main event between Gilbert Burns and Sean Brady. I broke this down a little bit more on the newest episode. That was episode 97 of the MMA Outsiders that came out yesterday evening, so you can get more of my analysis on the fight there. But just to give you some brief news and notes regarding the event, regarding Gilbert Burns versus Sean Brady, and so much more. And if these are things that I am repeating once again, I apologize, but I feel like it's too important to not to not discuss. So it's a Saturday afternoon card on the East Coast starting at 4 p.m. Eastern. The entire card is on ESPN Plus. It's a 13 fight card. As I just alluded to, Gilbert Burns versus Sean Brady. To quickly go over this fight really quick, looking at the tail of the tape here, we've got Gilbert Burns, who's 2-3 in his last five. We've got Sean Brady, who's 4-1 in his last five. Gilbert Burns sitting at a slight underdog as a former UFC welterweight title challenger. This is according to Tapology, plus 145. The comeback on the favorite Brady is minus 175 there. Gilbert Burns obviously out of Brazil. Sean Brady out of Philadelphia. Gilbert Burns just a little over 38 years old, while Sean Brady is 7 years younger at 31. And of course, just a slight reach advantage for Sean Brady at 72.5 versus Gilbert Burns at 71 inches. Looking at the Tapology predictions, at the time that we're recording this, 2,199 people have predicted the main event. I will be one of the 3,100 plus who will predict this fight officially later in the week. But so far, the polls indicate that Sean Brady has a slight edge over Gilbert Burns at 53% to Burns is 47%, which to me is very interesting. I think getting Gilbert Burns as a underdog is a rare feat that if you are a gambler, you should definitely take a look at. Again, this is a 5-round fight, and the reason why I'm leaning toward Gilbert Burns is I just think experience matters. I mean, you look at Gilbert Burns' UFC career, obviously currently sitting at 22-7 overall. In the UFC, he's 15-7, coming off of back-to-back losses, but these are losses that you can't sweat at. Losing to Jack Della Maddalena and losing to the current UFC welterweight champion Bilal Muhammad. That was in May of 2023. Burns' last fight was in March of 2024 during UFC 299. There, his last win came in April of last year against Jorge Masvidal. That was part of a 2-fight win streak there. And prior to that, he lost a very close decision to Hamzat Chimaev. He's also had some notable wins, including against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Tyron Woodley, Damian Maia, and Gunnar Nelson, to name a few. He's been in the UFC a very long time now. He's been in the UFC since 2014, so he's coming up on a decade of experience inside the octagon there. And looking over at Sean Brady, Sean Brady is one of the most unique stories, I think, in the UFC welterweight division. Currently sitting at 16-1 overall, and is sitting at 6-1 in the UFC. Notable wins include a win against former Ultimate Fighter competitor and winner, if I'm not mistaken, Kelvin Gastelum. Then, of course, he beat Michael Chiesa. He beat Jake Matthews. And He's also beat the likes of Court McGee and Gilbert Urbina, just to name a few as well. I mean, he's impressive, and I just think again that experience matters. Sean Brady's never been in a fight of this magnitude. 5 rounds, the pressure is going to be on him. If he wins, he stays in the welterweight mix. If Gilbert Burns wins, he has a chance to earn a potentially second title shot in the division. He earned a title shot a couple years ago, came up just short in a loss. But I who think this fight will be interesting. I've got Gilbert Burns with the slight edge. They're winning by a split decision. It's going to be 48-47 on 2 of the 3 judges' scorecards there. And I think Burns walks away with a win and arguably a fight of the year contender. Just a quick note, it sucks that it's at the Apex because this is a fight that I think deserves all of the spotlight to take place in an arena. It sucks that it's not being done in Tampa, Florida, or in one of these other locations. So Vegas gets the backdrop there, but it should be a great fight. Again, 4 p.m. Eastern start for the prelims. You could pick, you could watch the entire card with an ESPN Plus subscription, exclusively. So it should be exciting. Moving over to the NFL now, I'm very excited for this. It is going to be Caleb Williams' first official. Excuse me. It's going to be Caleb Williams' first official regular season game. Should be very exciting. Bears and the Titans. The entire city of Chicago is jacked up for this game. Whether you are going to this game or if you aren't going to this game, people are extremely ecstatic to see that the Bears are relevant again. Obviously, you get to see Caleb Williams. You get to see Roma Dunce. You get to see a much improved defensive front. I mean, and it should be exciting. Some things to look out for in Bears Titans, which I think there is important to note here. Just to give you a brief summary, I guess you could say here. This is according to Sports Illustrated and their betting section. According to Ian McMillan, who's now over at Sports Illustrated, formerly of Fansided, the odds currently as of September 2nd, according to BetMGM, the Bears are favored by 4.5. On the spread, the money line is plus or minus 210 in favor of the Bears, plus 170 in the comeback for Tennessee. The over-under is 45.5. Then, of course, just to give you some brief notes on the betting trend here, the under is 14-6 in the Titans' last 20 games. If you bet the Titans last year straight up, you sucked because their record there was 1-10. The over is 6-1 in the last 7 times the Titans have faced an AFC North team. I think he meant to say an NFC North team. That's a typo there because this is the crossover matchup. Bears finished the 2023 season at a 5-2 against the spread run, and of course the over is 8-2 in the Bears' last 10 games versus AFC opponents. Taking a look at the injury report here for the Titans, Jamal Adams is questionable at safety. Josh Wiley at tight end is also questionable. Arden Key at linebacker is questionable. Chichobi Awuzie at corner is also questionable. Otis Reese at linebacker, he's also questionable. DeAndre Hopkins, the longtime wide receiver, he's questionable as well as Luke Gifford. And looking over at the Bears, just a bit of a shorter outlook there. Keenan Allen is questionable. Wideout Jaquan Brisker at safety, and Kevin Byard, the third at safety, is questionable as well. Taking a look at some of the key players to watch for Tennessee, with Jarius Sneed, obviously the former Kansas City Chiefs cornerback. It should be a revamped defense there. And then, of course, Caleb Williams, who I've been super high on since the Bears drafted him. Obviously, he would be the biggest player to watch for the Bears because it is his first NFL regular season game. And this is according to Ian. I sort of disagree with this. He's picking the Titans to beat the Bears. I understand why there's going to be pressure on Williams, but if you want the Bears to have a strong start to I guess you could say an official strong start to the Matt Eberflus era, and I'm not saying it's like official as in he's the new coach because he's not, but this is truly the guy that he's wanted. So if you want a fresh start to a brand new regime, this is the game that you got to win to get off on the right foot. Because if you look at the Bears' upcoming schedule, you got this game against the Titans, then you got the Houston Texans in Houston on a national TV game, and then you got to go to Indianapolis. So playing the AFC South the first 3 games, and then playing the LA Rams shortly after that, it's important that you start the season at the very least 2-1, 3-0. But starting off anything less than that is going to be a bad sign for disaster. So officially, right now, I'm picking the Bears to win this game, cover the spread, 24-17. You'll get the rest of my NFL picks on Football Forecast, which is going to release later on at the beginning of this weekend. So stay tuned for all of my NFL picks and so much more. I had a very, very solid record against the spread last year, which was good enough to finish in the middle of the pack of the formerly Football Friday show. So I'm excited to take part in that once again. Moving back over to the college football side, my alma mater, the University of Illinois, is again hosting another home game. This is the second of 3 straight home games to begin the year, and they've got top 25 ranked Kansas coming into Champaign. This is a huge game for Illinois. They obviously lost to Kansas last year in Lawrence. Final score there, I'm pretty sure, was 34-23. Very, very exciting second half there. And this is a revenge game. And I mean, this is one of 6 rematch games for Brett Bielema and company. And I've read up a lot on this Illinois-Kansas game. And I would argue that I think the people who are saying that this is Illinois' biggest game under Brett Bielema, I think they're 100% right. Because if you think about Brett Bielema's tenure so far as coach, he's currently sitting at 19-19 overall as head coach of the Fighting Illini. Just to give you some news and notes here, Illinois is off to, this is according to Fighting Illini Athletics Communications. So shout out to them for all they do to give me all the information I need in order to review these games. And shout out to everyone who works in that department. You know who you are. You guys are great. Illinois is off to a 1-0 start for the 4th straight year under head coach Brett Bielema after a 45-0 victory over Eastern Illinois last Thursday night. The Illini defense forced 4 turnovers, 2 interceptions, and a pair of fumbles to record the first shutout since a 31-0 win over Chattanooga 2 years ago. That was September 22nd, 2022. It is Illinois' first season-opening shutout since September 6, 1986 versus Louisville. That was a 23-0 shutout win. Offensively, the Illini outgained the Panthers 486-196 with a well-balanced attack that featured 244 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground and 242 yards through the air with 4 passing touchdowns. And as I alluded to, Brett Bielema did improve to 19-19 overall. It is the best start for a coach since Lou Tepper back in 1995, where he started 19-18-1 overall. Taking a look over at some more news and notes entering the Kansas game this week. It's going to be Saturday's game will be the 7th meeting between Illinois and Kansas, and the second in as many seasons after the Illini visited Lawrence in 2023. Illinois last hosted Kansas in Champaign in 1968. Illinois is 3-1 versus Kansas in Champaign, having posted 3 straight shutout victories in 1916, 17, and 1929 before a home loss versus the Jayhawks in that exact year, 1968. Illinois is 1-1 in Memorial Stadium versus Kansas, hosting games inside the century-old venue in 1929 and 1968. The Illinois' home wins over Kansas in 16 and 17 were played at the team's original home, Illinois Field, which I know nothing about, so don't ask. Illinois' first game in the series versus Kansas on October 27, 1892 was the 16th game in program history. Saturday's game will be the 1,310th game in Illini history. And just briefly here, some of the connections. One of the most unique ones: Illinois junior outside linebacker Daniel Brown is from Kansas City, Kansas, where he played high school football at Bishop Ward, and then earned NJCAA All-America First Team honors and JL Conference Defensive Player of the Year accolades at Hutchinson Community College in Hutchinson, Kansas, and of course, as many hardcore Illinois fans know, Illinois has 3 players from the state of Kansas, so there are a lot of connections. They're a huge game. Brett Bielema versus Lance Leopold, for those of you who don't know, Hence, Leopold would have been the other runner-up choice had Brett Bielema not been hired as Illinois' coach a couple of years ago. So there's a lot at stake in this game. I'm going to give my official pick here. I think this is going to be a great game. I think these are two teams that are on the rise in their respective conferences, but I think Kansas is just a little bit better. I'm going to take Kansas by a field goal, 23-20. Would I love to be wrong? Would I love to see Illinois win and potentially be ranked in the next edition of the AP Top 25 poll ahead of Week 3? Absolutely, but I just think Kansas is a little bit better. Illinois will play well. Hopefully, it's a sellout. Brett Bielema did report on Monday at his weekly press conference previewing Kansas that they are 1,000 tickets away from a potential sellout at Memorial Stadium, which is not common in Champaign. So a lot of exciting stuff from an Illinois perspective. This is a critical game. If you could win this game, start 2-0 and go into homecoming with all the momentum ahead of games against Central Michigan and then a road tilt on national TV against Nebraska, you could set yourself up for success later on in the season. So a lot to be excited about there. Looking over briefly to Northwestern versus Duke, this should be an exciting game as well. Northwestern is obviously on the comeback trail. Obviously, had a very good year against David Braun, or with David Braun as head coach, as he took over the program late in the season, looking to keep their home winning streak alive against the Blue Devils team that looks a lot different than they did a couple of years ago. I expect Northwestern to get the job done, and I really do. I expect them to win this game. I expect them to knock off Duke at home in their Lakefront Stadium. And just to have some news and notes from last weekend's win against Miami of Ohio. Again, that was a 13-6 win for the Wildcats there. Northwestern had 150 rushing yards, threw for 328 through the air, had 20 first downs to Miami of Ohio 17, and then Mike Wright in his first game as the Wildcats starting quarterback did pretty well. 65 yards on the ground, a 13-yard touchdown run in the third quarter there, and he had 178 yards, 18 out of 30 passing on the day. I think Northwestern gets it done again. I think their defense carries them. I think this is a lot closer of a game than people expect. I'm gonna go 20. I'm gonna go 20 to 17 Wildcats. I don't know if that will be good enough to cover the spread, as I don't fully know if the spread has been officially finalized yet. But I do think Northwestern does just enough to win this game. Started the season 2-0 before their schedule gets a lot tougher. They gotta go to Washington. They also have to play out of other critical teams, especially a game against Ohio State in mid-November. So it should be an exciting season for the Wildcats, but I think they can start their home schedule with 2 wins in the month of September before the schedule gets a lot tougher. Going over some other college football games to watch, would be remiss if I did not make a brief mention. Michigan versus Texas. I think everybody's been excited for this game since the schedule was released months ago. I think hotel rooms in Ann Arbor have been sold out for a long time, and I don't even think you could buy a ticket to this game for a reasonable price at the time that we're recording this. Which by the way, don't be surprised if when I give you this number that tickets are going to be impossible to get. This is according to a third-party vendor on StubHub, which obviously is a very reliable source. It's arguably the hottest ticket in Ann Arbor this weekend, a noon Eastern start. And yeah, good luck finding a ticket, because one of the most expensive tickets that I am currently seeing for one of the best seats in the entire house, section 24, row 6, is going to cost you $832. So this just adds up. Big noon kickoff will be at your services to do this game. As Johnson, Joel Cladd, and he tapped will be on site from Ann Arbor. So this should be a very exciting game. Don't have an official pick for this game yet, but would not be surprised though if Michigan does pull off the win, just considering that it's in Ann Arbor. It's against a Texas team that's, still getting used to, the whole flavor of the SEC, and, this could be a potential national championship type of preview game here. So this should be very exciting. I'm excited to watch this game. That's just one of multiple games that are taking place across the college football landscape as well. And I think what else is interesting to know too is you just gotta love it that college football is back in full swing, and we've got these marquee programs like Michigan and Texas playing on national TV. It doesn't get much better than that, and I understand it's not as sexy of a matchup when it comes to the coaches. We no longer have Jim Harbaugh, but these are still two storied programs. Should be a tremendous game. It's it's one of those heavyweight fight type of games where you don't want to miss a single second of it. So that I think could potentially be one of the biggest games on the schedule to watch. There are other ones too across all the other conferences, but if I were to just pick one game, Michigan versus Texas is arguably the best game of the entire weekend and potentially one of the best games of the entire year. Just briefly moving on, though, we're going to just briefly talk about the Cubs. They've been a bit of a resurgence over the last month, staying in the NL wildcard picture. They had their losing streak or winning streak rather snapped last night at the hands of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Just really tough. It was a 5-3 defeat. A bad start to the month of September, in my opinion, and it'll be interesting to see if the Cubs can stay in the thick of it. I mean, they're looking up at several other teams that look like they're going to lock their playoff spots up. But again, just to see this Cubs team in the mix in early September after a kind of a bad April and May to start the year, you got to you got to feel excited as a Cubs fan that A, you're over 500 and B, you're playing competitive baseball. And as someone who's been to a couple of Cubs games this season and unfortunately had a losing record overall when you add up the games I went to, it'll be an interesting month of September. So just to briefly go over who the Cubs have moving forward. They're obviously finishing up their series with Pittsburgh this week. They obviously had a game Tuesday night, and then of course tonight as well. Then they bring in the Yankees, which is going to be a super tough ticket to get. If you have a ticket, congratulations. Then they have the Dodgers, always never easy. They got a Rockies team that's pretty solid, and of course they've got the A's, they've got the Washington Nationals coming up. That's actually the weekend of my birthday. They have a home series there. That could be critical. They've got a Phillies team in Philadelphia. That's a team I've seen a couple times, and then they end the regular season with the Cincinnati Reds. So I think if the Cubs can do well enough just to finish a little bit above 500, that might be enough to sneak them into the third wild card spot. But of course, no guarantees as they need other teams to lose as well. So that's something interesting to note there. Just to briefly run through everything, because I know we're running a little bit over time here. Moving on to Zinger. Just going to make this really quick, starting with Brian Kelly. I'm just going to say, I think there's a reason why people don't like him. I really do. I mean, I think his prima donna personality is one thing to start, and number two, he just always seems like an angry person to me. It seems like that he can never seem to get out of his own way for things that go right and even for things that go wrong. And I think that that's a problem. Again, as I alluded to earlier in this episode, he needs to think about why he lost this USC game and where he could have played a part in it. If because if he's just going to say like, "Oh, I'm angry at my players" or whatever, I understand the coach doesn't play the game, but decisions can play a part in that. If I didn't kick a field goal here, if I didn't, use this substitution here or whatever the case is, could it change the outcome of the game? I'm just saying, I think that Brian Kelly needs to be held accountable for his actions, and he needs to understand that he isn't the greatest college football coach in the world. He's an above average college football coach who failed to bring Notre Dame a national championship, which everybody thought was going to happen and didn't happen. And LSU so far, outside of a few really high profile recruits, I don't really think he's done all that much. So I think that people are overhyping him a little bit. I understand it's one game, but I don't think this LSU team has been the same team since Ed Ogeron left the program a couple of years ago. I really don't. They have not been the same team since Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase were there, and he's the only one that can figure out what LSU's identity is going to be moving forward. Because if he can't do that, it's gonna be quite a long year for LSU, and I just think I just think overall it's quite disappointing from that regard. Wanted to quickly move into something else, and a lot of people complain about this. About week zero doesn't matter, and week one doesn't matter. But I think that parity in college football is a good thing because look, we wait 7-8 months every single year for college football to return. Then when college football returns, everybody's super excited. They're like, "Oh, uh, yeah, all my favorite teams are playing every single week, whatever, whatever." And then people don't realize how awesome it is until the upsets actually happen. See, having parity in college football is great because it leaves the college football playoff committee scratching their heads every single week. Okay, if number one loses, what are we going to do? If number two loses, what are we going to do? If number 11 loses, what are we going to do? It's this moving puzzle piece and domino effect that I think people struggle to fully understand is that having all of these upsets in college football is good because it creates drama, it creates buzz across message boards and sports media websites and sites like Sports Illustrated and 247 and all these other team centric sites where people have the time to discuss college football during the day, either while working or while they're doing whatever or while they're even working from home. It's great for everybody involved. So I think the more upsets in college football that you have, the better because it leaves you guessing like, oh, just like a reality TV show, like, oh, what's gonna happen next, except that college football is real reality. And I think that that's an exciting feat. Given all the news that's going on with the social media platform X and given what's going on in Brazil, I don't think the NFL should take a risk in hosting Green Bay versus Philadelphia in Brazil. It prevents the NFL media from doing their job properly by tweeting what's going on in the game. It prevents the NFL from doing what they need to do from a social media perspective to get out the best content possible. And it also prevents Peacock from pushing their streaming service to ensure that people can watch Green Bay versus Philadelphia. Simply put, they need to make a decision soon. I think this game needs to be moved to Philadelphia. I think even though the NFL did what they could to expand their global reach, Brazil was a bad idea. And I think they need to make a decision fast because the clock is ticking. The game is on Friday. It's the second game on the NFL calendar, right after Ravens versus Chiefs in KC the night before, and they need to make a move quickly. So that's all I have to say about that. And we're about a week away from UFC 306, and I truly think that it is shaping up to fail. And here's why. Just a couple weeks ago, ticket prices for UFC 306 were currently sitting at $3,000 plus. Now you can find a ticket to this event for a little over $700. And I think there is a reason for that. And the reason why is because the MGM also has Canelo versus Berlanga at T-Mobile Arena that same night, and I think prices are starting to dwindle because people are realizing, oh shit, I'm paying for 10 fights on the card with really only two notable fights at the top of it from a casual audience's perspective. Is it really worth $3,000 or whatever the price tag is for me to go? And I think the answer that people are realizing is no. So unless this event looks great on TV, I don't really know if you could call it a success because every single time Dana mentions, oh, the gate, the gate, the gate, they're guaranteeing the gate, whatever. What he fails to mention is what is the UFC doing about their gate? He can't seem to answer that question. And I think the reason why is because there's so much unknown from a promotional perspective. They don't fully know how it's going to go off, or I guess they're the only ones who know how it's going to go off from a production standpoint. And that doesn't help the people who are buying the tickets because even though they're paying for fights, they don't exactly know what they're fully paying for because they don't know what the full sphere experience is going to be like. And Trent Rainsmith, who contributes to Forbes Sports Business Money, said it best in one of his recent columns. He goes, you know, the UFC owes the fans one, and the fact that it would be nice for the fans to see, what the in-house experience is going to look like because if they know, then they don't know what they're paying for. So I think with about 11 days to go till this card at the time that we're recording this, there is still so much unknown in what we don't know from a production standpoint. And this is something I'm going to talk about more next week when I preview the card. Is fully taking a look at what UFC 306 is obviously going to be remembered as. Just quickly going over to Zan's look ahead, we obviously have the NFL week one schedule. Have a lot of a lot of games this week. Obviously, it's a packed week because It's obviously the first week of the season, so of course everybody's playing. So just to give you a brief overview here, we got KC versus the Ravens on Thursday night. That's an 8:20 Eastern kickoff. Then we got the Packers against the Eagles at 8:15. A whole swath of Sunday games, which includes Carolina versus New Orleans, Minnesota against the Giants, the Patriots against the Bengals. A lot of people are picking the Bengals in Survivor. I'm still confirming my Survivor pick at the time that we're recording this. Pittsburgh against Atlanta, Houston versus the Colts, Arizona going to Buffalo, Tennessee coming to Chicago, Jaguars going to Miami, and then, of course, looking over at the later window here, Denver against Seattle, the Raiders against the Chargers, Dallas against Cleveland, the Commanders against the Bucks, the Rams against the Lions, and then, of course, Monday Night Football, the return of Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets going to Santa Clara to take on San Francisco. Should be a very exciting first week of games as well. And I'll obviously just briefly glossing over the college football one. The big upset to watch, as I sort of alluded to earlier in this episode, would be the Texas Michigan game to see whether or not those two teams are legit or not. But that's essentially all I have for this week's edition of Bando's Breakdowns. It was an edition again. This was episode 20, and moving over to Zain's errors. I don't think I had any, which was a good thing. So I guess that means it's time for me to slowly but surely get out of here. So for everybody at the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, I'm Zain Bando. This has been episode 20, courtesy of the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, once again, and presented by Playback. We will see you guys next week for episode 21. Again, another packed show. This is going to be a new theme now, where most of it is going to be football, but I was excited to talk about some other stuff as well. So stay tuned for more, both from myself and from the rest of the network. And until then, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Have a good one.